a now third year medical student at UC Irvine, and I'm very happy to be working with Christ Our Redeemer Church. We're partnering with the Center for Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disorders as well to bring this webinar to the community. So I'm very excited and honored to work with all of the amazing folks on this call today. So to introduce who's here, we have our contacts with the Center for Autism, Dr. Kristen Joyner, Ms. Nellie Valentine, amazing, wonderful people that are super knowledgeable about autism and community. We also have parent partners, Cecilia, Shanae, and Nedra here as well to share their experiences with us and to, share some tips. So without further ado, we'll get started. Take it away, Dr. Chandler.
Yes, so I'm going to be starting just to give you guys an overview of what autism is and what are the diagnostic criteria, and then I'll talk a little bit about what are some resources that you can access in the community if you hear concerns today that you're worried about. And so just in general, you might have heard this or be aware, but 1 in 36 individuals is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Which can be very alarming. Obviously, these rates are increasing. It is 4 times more common in boys than girls, and it does affect all ethnic and socioeconomic groups. Go ahead, next slide. Thank you. And so in order to meet criteria to have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, you have to have symptoms in 2 broad areas, and that's social communication and then restricted and repetitive behaviors. And I'm going to talk about each one in a little bit more detail. Go ahead, next slide. And so when we're talking about social communication, or deficits in social communication, you have to show signs and symptoms in each of these 3 categories. The first one would be deficits in your social emotional reciprocity. And you can think of reciprocity as just a fancy way of just saying back and forth interaction. So these can be things like having difficulties maintaining conversation where it feels like that individual is equally as interested in you as you are in their topics and interest as well. We also see deficits in the nonverbal communicative behavior. So we think of our nonverbals are things like eye contact, gestures, being able to read and respond to the emotions of others. So when we're not talking, think of how many social cues you still get from your environment. So more commonly, people think of individuals with autism maybe not making or maintaining their eye contact. And then the third area that you have to show some sort of a challenge in or deficits in developing and maintaining relationships. When we're thinking of really little kids, this could show up at first in differences in the way that a child is playing, realizing that your child is having a really hard time sharing or engaging in like cooperative play, or where you're seeing your child is more interested in the objects that the other kids are playing in rather than in the interaction with the other children. Also, what can show up here are things like challenges with pretend play, imaginary play, and like I said, cooperative play, where there's this idea that we're playing around the same theme. Let's go ahead and next slide. And then that second broad category is you have to show some pattern of restricted or repetitive behaviors. And you have to have 2 out of the following main categories that I'm going to talk about. The one is stereotyped or repetitive behaviors. And this is where people might think of things like hand flapping or lining up objects. I think those are the more common ones. This could also be like rocking your body, other just small, subtle, repetitive behaviors, hand posturing, things like that. There's also insistence on sameness. So think of individuals who seem really, really rigid to holding on to their idea or to their routine. And so this could be like changes in the schedule are really setting your child off. And while schedules in general are very helpful for children and children like their routine, we're thinking about when this is really causing a major upset, maybe to the point that you now drive a different direction or you drive the same direction. Because your child just insists that you do the same thing every single time, or you only serve them their breakfast on the blue Thomas the Train plate because that's all that they will allow for. And then there's highly restricted or fixated interests. And so these can be, these examples of this could be a child who is really, or an individual who's really, really into a certain topic. Let's say, again, I'll bring up Thomas the Train or The Incredibles. Maybe there's a certain show that they just have to watch and watch and watch, and they could repeat it, or the YouTube videos that, oh, they're really into like watching people build things, but they're not actually into like the actual playing with the thing. I think a comment or something that stands out to me is working a long time ago with a 4-year-old who was really into bonsai trees. And if you can imagine, while their parents thought that was really neat, and it is a really neat, interesting topic that most people don't know about, but it's going to be really hard from a social standpoint to connect to your peers when you're that age talking about such a highly specific topic. And then the other one is having hyper or hypo reactivity sensory input. So that just meaning being overly active or being underreactive to certain things. So maybe again, something I think commonly I'll hear, my child doesn't like the sound of people singing, like birthday parties. They'll cover their ears, or things that are not necessarily loud. To them, the pitch and tone is really having an impact. That's just an example. This also could be like things on their hands. Next slide. And so just keep in mind that everything that I just mentioned, you might be thinking to yourself, well, oh, I'm a little bit sensitive, or I have difficulties making eye contact. It's not necessarily that you just have one of these things, it's a cluster of symptoms. And also, these symptoms need to be present from an early developmental period. So, this isn't something like suddenly at age 30, you would say, like, oh, these symptoms just appeared. It might be that that individual didn't have a diagnosis, but there would be signs and symptoms that you could go back to in their early developmental period. The other one is that these symptoms have to cause clinically significant impairment. So again, autism spectrum is on a spectrum. We all vary in our level of comfort in how we socialize with others. But you have to think to yourself, is this impairing my child's life? Is this impairing their ability to transition, to make friends, to attend school, things like that? That's when we start to be concerned of it, that it's having an impact versus like a child who's just a little bit more shy, but then warms up later. And then these symptoms that I described cannot be better explained by another condition, such as intellectual disability. And so some common co-occurring diagnoses or symptoms that are not specific to autism, but we do see a higher incidence among individuals with autism are things like epilepsy or seizures. Thinking of like feeding issues, being a picky eater, or having a lot of gut issues, like a lot of constipation, constantly having an upset stomach. Sleep disturbances, that's another big one. I will commonly hear my child sleeps during the day and is up all night. So their rhythms might be off. And then we also see other mental health concerns, especially as children are getting older. We see things like anxiety, depression. And again, just keep in mind, not everybody who has autism has these comorbidities, but they can. And it's important to be aware of that so that when you talk to your physician or whoever's providing care, that they can also look into some of these other things. And then just in general, hopefully by this point, people are not still hearing this, but in the past, when this diagnosis was first recognized, they thought it was caused by cold and unloving parents. That is not true. There's nothing that you did that caused your child to have autism, and it is also not caused by vaccines. And so, if you heard anything today so far that I've mentioned that has you curious or you're looking for more support, just know that there is a lot out there, and it's important that you're aware of what those supports are, and that you know how to advocate um, for those supports. And so, we'll talk about each of those in just a little more detail. Just keep in mind the supports that I'll mention, just like what works for one family is not necessarily going to work for everybody. So you want to tailor this to your own child's needs. They're not going to need all of the things that I will talk about. So, in terms of the systems of services that exist, I'll start by just highlighting the regional center. So, the regional center in California is our system of care for early intervention services. You might hear a lot the push for early intervention, early intervention. And so, if you have a child that has a delay in some area of development, be it speech, they're nonverbal when they're 2 years old and they haven't spoken yet, or they have motor delays, you can contact the local regional center and they can qualify for early intervention services under the age of 3. Regional center is not going to diagnose your child, but they will identify an area of developmental need, and they will provide the funding for the intervention. And then after your child ages out of regional center, so after the age of 3, the regional center is going to direct you to your public school system. And so if you are planning to send your child to a public school, it's the public school financial responsibility to provide those supports in an educational setting. So you would request that your child's evaluated for special education services, such as an IEP or a 504 plan. And the school does a big evaluation and decides if your child can qualify for services in the school district, such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, or just behavioral supports. Just also keep in mind, schools don't diagnose children, but they again will identify an area of educational need. The regional center also, your child could qualify to be a regional center client after the age of 3 if they have a significant impairment in 2 or more areas of development. So you have to have a diagnosis and you have to show impairment. And regional center is just a good service to be aware of, because you can think of regional center as a payer of service. And so if you have private insurance, but your insurance denies your child a service that's deemed medically necessary, if your child is a regional center client, then you would then go to the regional center, show that you've been denied. And then hopefully it's not an easy process, but you would then have the regional center support you from a financial standpoint. And then just through your own private insurance, or whether you're paying out of pocket, there's other therapies that you can gain access to, such as applied behavior analysis or ABA therapy. And it's behavior therapy, it's just working with a child to help increase certain skills that are going to help their functioning or decrease skills that are problematic to their functioning. And then because we know autism affects speech therapy could be a good intervention, occupational therapy for things like feeding concerns, sensory related concerns. And then, like I said, and then behavioral therapy on there is just referring to actually mental health counseling. So seeing somebody like myself, I'm a psychologist and I work with kids who have autism and other co-occurring mental health disorders. And then just in general, you're wanting to make sure that you stay involved in your community. I think this is a great example about community inclusion, of where here you have a church who is supporting their members by putting on this webinar. So connecting with your church could be a good one. Connecting with whether it's sharing it with your child's diagnosis with the school, whether it's seeking out recreational activities within the community, joining support groups, which I'm sure like Nellie, or this is even a great example of our parent partners who work with us. And Nellie, I'm sure will touch on supports that we do have. And so just making sure you're involved when possible, connect connect as much as you can. And then just other considerations as there are also resources out there for your child if there's more concerns about their safety, such as ID bracelets, thinking about safety around the summertime and swimming and things like that. There's a lot of resources that are out there that can help you to protect your child. And that is the end of my piece. Thank you for allowing me to present.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joyner. So we have some sources here if anyone wants to read a little more. And now we'll be hearing from our amazing parent partners who will be speaking to, daily life, lived experience of being parents of children with autism. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to our parent partners.
Thank you, Avery. Hi, I'm Cecilia Rideout, and I am going to start us off with our lived experience as parents. And then we will open it up for a Q&A after we hear from all of us. Just make sure.
Hi, my name is Shanae, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about my son and his diagnosis with autism, as well as my journey alongside with him. So as parents, we know that our children are the best things ever. They're all special, and we take them to the doctors or the pediatrician regularly to ensure that they're growing accordingly. Usually the pediatrician will give you a milestone sheet to follow along with and track to make sure that your child is growing accordingly. According to those stages, my son was advanced in motor skills. He was sitting on his own by 6 months, turning over at 7 months, crawling by 8 months, and fully walking by 9 months. So I was just ecstatic that he was just always on the move. However, I did slowly start to notice that his source of play or his play wasn't as traditional as other children's. There would be times where he would only just want to line things up or stack things on top of each other, and he was so persistent about it. Another thing would be toys with wheels, anything with a wheel, whether it be a car, a train, an airplane, a wagon. He had to have it flipped upside down, and he would just run his hands along the wheels and watch them spin around and around in a circle for hours. And at the time, I really didn't think anything of it. I thought he was just, engaged, and this is just something that's really fascinating to him. I also noticed that, he lacked eye contact. I would say his name and he would not look my way, or I would make a silly noise. So I brought it up, to his pediatrician, and we went in and had a hearing and vision test. And they let us know that everything checked out fine. He just might not be interested in what you guys are engaging him with. So I'm like, okay, I'll take the hint. I'm not that fun as a mom. So I went ahead and started, proactively looking for other moms with children around his age so we can have play dates. Once we started having play dates, I did notice that my son never really engaged in play with other kids. He mostly played by himself, or he would play alongside them with parallel play, as long as they never entered his bubble. If they did, it usually would result in toys being thrown or screaming and constant meltdowns. I would ask, the moms that we would be interacting with, what are you guys taking of this? What would you guys do in this kind of situation? And a lot of the times they would tell me it's mostly because he's just a single child and he has no siblings. So he doesn't really know how to interact, but he just needs more interaction. And I honestly believed them. I thought that he just needed to adjust to more children. So I was able to get him enrolled into daycare. And unfortunately, the first daycare was not working out. Within 2 weeks, the director contacted me to let me know that they were unable to keep him due to his lack of communication, as well as constant crying, unable to be consoled, and then unable to engage with other children. So I took him to another facility that was more of a facility, and the director there actually, within a couple of days, let me know that she's noticed that my son had some traits that resembled those of other children that attended that were on the spectrum. And she asked me, "Do you think that your child may be on the spectrum?" And I told her I had no idea what that was. I said, "I'm going to have to get back to you, and I'll have to do some research." So that night I got home and got right onto it. I looked up what autism was and the traits that follow along with them. And I want to say 99% of them all aligned with my child, from the sensory seeking, the hand waving, the nonverbal. It all aligned for him, and he was about 3 years old at this time. So I went ahead and contacted the neurologist as soon as the morning hit. And I want to say within a week or so, we got an appointment, and then testing and so took about a month, and we received our diagnosis. It was officially on paper, black and white, here it is. So now where do I go and what do I do? Those were the things that were on my mind. Like, I don't know how to move forward. Luckily, California has a plethora of resources. I was able to receive speech, occupational therapy, and even respite care. Because of his diagnosis, he was able to start school as well. So that way he was able to start getting an individual education plan, which will help him further his success in his educational careers. So now the next thing that came was the social stigma. What are my friends and my parents and my family going to think? And I'm not going to lie, I was hesitant at first to bring it up, but I brought it up to the person that means the most to me, my mother. And, she does not believe in mental health. It's just not something we typically talk about. But when I let her know my concerns, the official diagnosis, she did a 180 turn and started doing research and trying to find out ways that we can help make my son's life a little better, a little easier, become a little more empowered in sharing my story. Because at the end of the day, it's not just sharing, but providing education, tools, or resources for those that actually may be in need and don't even know. At the end of the day, we don't get a manual for our children when they're born. And navigating through life with a tiny human that has their own feelings, their own wants, and their own needs, sometimes it's very challenging. However, as parents, it is our duty to provide them with the best upbringing possible. So if you do notice that your child is showing signs of atypical behavior, do not feel ashamed or discouraged in reaching out to others, doing research, asking questions, or even getting your child evaluated. At the end of the day, we're only here to provide the best for our children. We want to ensure that they have a stable upbringing, a solid foundation, so that way when they go off into life as adults, they are nothing but successful and happy individuals. The resources that are out there literally are only there to ensure this. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. And you'll definitely learn a lot along the way, as well as meet cool people and share amazing stories to help you better yourself and your child.
Thank you, Shanae, for sharing your story. I feel so fortunate to have found this Women of Color Empowerment group and to have met Shanae. My name's Cecilia, and my autism journey has a lot of similarities to Shanae's experience, which in and of itself has made me feel less alone. My daughter's almost 6 years old. During the first year and a half of her life, we noticed she wasn't hitting certain milestones when we would go in for our well check appointments. We voiced our concerns to the pediatrician and were quickly dismissed, told that her speech would come and that because she was so advanced in her motor skills, that we shouldn't worry about her speech. I wouldn't really even voice my concerns to my family because we were already fielding comments about how we should be disciplining her or parenting her differently. We changed pediatricians and I finally felt validated in my concerns. Our pediatrician gave us a referral for a speech assessment and referred us to the regional center. From there, we set off on our autism journey that would gain momentum and give us the confidence we needed to continue the hard work for us and for our daughter. To be completely honest, autism wasn't even on our radar. We assumed we needed some help with her speech development. It wasn't until we started the various assessments that we noticed one of the recurring themes was, does she play appropriately with toys? And as you can see, one of her favorite things to do when she was younger was to line things up. She was good at identifying similar objects and putting them in order, being very meticulous about spacing them out, and she would always take a look at the finished product and look so proud about what she'd done. I didn't realize that this was something we should have been looking out for, among many other things. Our daughter was officially diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when she was about 2.5. It was at that point that I pretty much tuned out all of the white noise and people's unsolicited opinions and advice and became laser focused on my daughter and what we needed to do for her. Because for me, while we had been doing daily ABA at home for almost 9 months at that point, the diagnosis made it real. Honestly, I was embarrassed and feared what people thought, that if my family, my friends, anyone knew, that they'd judge me for being a bad parent. I thought we could attack these deficits with ABA and whatever other services I could find, like speech, and we would get ahead of it and no one would ever know, because here I was, worried about what other people would think. We quickly learned just how important early intervention is and how vital it is to start services that will teach her the tools she'll need to navigate the world. My husband and I are very in tune with her and her needs, so while she wasn't speaking or even really gesturing, we would be able to predict what it was she needed or wanted. She was our only child at the time, so we had nothing to compare her to. Educating myself on treatments and services, what I can do to support her, what resources are out there, all became my top priority. I needed to educate myself in order to help her learn. And I'm not gonna lie, it feels like learning a completely different language. It was a complete shift in perspective. I was forced to slow down and see things from my daughter's perspective. It was learning that my daughter processes, sees, and understands the world around her in a completely different way than I do, and that her neurotypical peers do. I needed to shift my view and try to understand what my daughter is experiencing. She's frustrated because she's trying to communicate with me but can't. She's overstimulated by the noises around her, which I'm able to tune out or ignore. She's upset and she's angry, and to the outside world, she probably looks disobedient, but that couldn't be further from the truth. We've worked to get my daughter the support she needs through various avenues. She's done in-home ABA, group speech, one-on-one speech, OT, music therapy, in-clinic ABA with a social group of peers, and she also attended a special needs preschool and is now in kindergarten. It's very easy to want to sort of hole up at home and shield them from the outside world of triggers and you from the judgmental stares you may get, but I had to constantly remind myself that the most important thing here is my daughter. When it comes down to it, it's my family and the success of my oldest daughter over everything else out there. We're about 4 years into our autism journey, and the growth we've seen in our daughter is immense. She went from screaming and crying as her only way to communicate with us to her attending an elementary school, carrying her backpack, sometimes getting school lunch, sitting and working independently at her desk, and she even joined the marathon club at her school with kids her age through 6th grade. We're working through the growing pains of reaching new levels of language and expecting more out of her. We've learned what gives her a sense of security and put in the work to provide her with the support and set her up for success. And that means creating weekly photo schedules for her so she knows where she's going every day. It means writing our own social stories when we are doing things outside of her typical routine, like flying on an airplane. We did all of this because we knew that the only people who will advocate for our daughter, fight for her, and give her a voice when she had none is us. We couldn't just wait for things to happen or potentially improve on their own. We had to make things happen for her. What we needed to empower us was the constant reminder that we are the expert on our child. Everyone's experience is different, and what works for some may not work for others, but the common denominator that bonds us all together is our fierce love for our children and doing what we can to help them thrive. Shanae and I each started out as parents to young children who in no way were experts on autism, but we've joined support groups and been fortunate enough to attend different trainings, and now we're able to share our stories with others and be mentors to parents and caretakers who are just starting out on their autism journey. This is only the beginning for both of our stories, but we wanted to let you know you are not alone in this. There's support out there, and don't ever doubt that you have what it takes to fight for what your child needs.
And just to follow up on mine and Shanae's experiences with young children on the spectrum, I wanted to share an update and a win for my daughter. I think to the untrained eye, this looks like a collage of pictures. And while it is, these are actually huge wins that we've celebrated for her. And I won't go through all of them, but each photo represents months and even years of hard work that we've put in through therapies and consistency in our home and routine. And over the weekend, we actually received a letter from the mayor's office, and my daughter was nominated and selected to be recognized for her achievements this academic year in the city's student recognition program. And it's not a program that's autism specific. It's just to recognize students who've had personal achievements. And we've worked so hard to have her included. And because of our hard work and my daughter's hard work, she's being recognized as just a well-rounded student through her involvement in school clubs and activities and outside sports. And we're just so incredibly proud of her and can't wait to go to the city council meeting next week for her formal recognition. But just as much as we talk about how hard it is and all the hard work that we put in, it is just nice to celebrate, some of the bigger wins, along with wins that may seem small but are huge for us. But now to talk about the experience of older children, since Shanae and I have younger kiddos on the spectrum, is our other parent partner, Nedra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Cecilia. I appreciate that. My name is Nedra, and I am here to talk about my kiddos that is on the spectrum. There's me and my two sets of twins, and my youngest, they just turned 16 in March and are high schoolers, and they're the reason why I'm here. It's such a delight to see them now, remembering when I had them 16 years ago, and to see how much they've grown and changed and enveloped in their health and development, and also the challenges they face each day. They're just wonderful, delightful, exciting, and energetic kiddos, and very introverted, especially one of my daughters that I'm going to be talking about, who is high functioning autism. She loves to play basketball. She's an avid basketball player. She loves it a lot, much better than soccer or baseball. She just wrapped her third season a few months ago. And so watching her just be engaged and play basketball, is such a great thing to see her, evolve in the sport. She's really quite excellent at the sport, and she tends to score lots of basket every time she plays. So that's really fun to watch. As her growing gets older, there's like lots of challenges that goes along with her growth. And primarily one of those challenges is her being non-vocal. Her speech and languages are not complete. So pun intended, to drag vocabulary out of her. She does have an AAC device that she received last year from high school, and she just started to warm up to it and start to feel comfortable using it. As my baby girl gets older, it seems like more challenging to get to her, because most of the time she's really withdrawn because of her autism, and with different challenges and things that are happening to her body. Sometimes it's hard when she is doing her ABA, or even just in her self-care, can be a bit of a challenge most of the time. As you can see here, she loves to sweep. She also loves to do laundry, things that I don't like to do. They're not my preferable chore. So I hand them down to her, and she does like a very excellent job at it. But I think the greatest delight for me is just watching her and the excitement that she gets from doing something I believe that's her own, and she's like so engaged in it, and she's just really happy. And when she's done with the task, it's like, oh my gosh, she's done a great job in here. So it's just really great to see her get into things like these, because then they're going to be really important for her as she matriculate and gets older. So it's really nice to see her do these chores. She also loves to dance. I noticed her love of dance in junior high. So she's been in dance since then. And she's really quite good at it. She's a part of her high school dance production, and actually just wrapped uh, a dance production last year, but then she also had another production this past Saturday. And it's just really impressive to see her in her element and just like have no care. She just leaves her heart on that stage, and her smile is just reminiscent of that passion and her love for dance. And there's her and her sister. She's about to get ready for one of her dance numbers. So that was really cool. On the other flip of that coin is her twin. This is her twin. Here you see him using headphones for the first time. That was really fun because he's always rejected them. So it was really nice. I think it probably had something to do with the lights and all the colorful things going on. So that was an excellent achievement for him. But even more so, I think what was more exciting for me as his mom is to see him navigate his tablet without the use of the headphones and navigate with the use of the headphones. So that was really nice for me to see him be able to do those two things at the same time. My son, he's more impacted with his autism and other IDDs. So he requires, 24-hour care. He's very, very independent, and I like to just watch him in his independence and encourage his independence, because I feel it's necessary and it's important. Um, Unlike his sister, we've had struggles to get him an AAC device. So currently he's in high school and he still doesn't have a device yet. What the school encouraged us, well, myself, was to have him work with the PECs and see how he navigates with those. And then we'll come back to the AAC device sometime this year. He navigates really well with his PECs, which he used appropriately, by the way. Before he did not, now he does. And I believe that a lot of this comes down to the testing that they want for these children, to get the evaluation to see where they are and see how, the recommendation to get the device for them. The struggle is very real and frustrating, but as his mom, I am very determined and up to the challenge. And I'm not going to give up until, he gets what he needs. And I'm going to continue to advocate for him to get this device, because I feel like he can really benefit from having such an instrument in his life. Here he is, we're at the movies, and this was really fun because my son gets very overstimulated by the smallest thing that happens around him. So just to have him here in the movie theater and bringing his device along with him was really fun. I was able to watch him go from one tablet to the next. He has the green, he puts that down, he gets the blue, and no assistance is needed. He's able to find his videos with little no help, which is really exquisite and fun to watch. And I do believe that because of these things that I'm seeing, and I'm going to be reporting when I do, his upcoming meeting, hopefully it gives them more encouragement to get him that device. So I believe with him having the AAC would really improve his communication significantly, and just give him more of an opportunity to continue with his speech and language development. Here I am with my sweet one. we were at a conference, my very first conference in this autism world there in Costa Mesa last year. And my girl got the opportunity and I to meet with Temple Grandin. And I feel like as their mom, you know, I'm the specialist with my child. So it is my responsibility to educate and navigate for them. And, you know, it becomes harder sometimes because the system that's in place to help you is the system that is giving us roadblocks to their successes. So I feel like it's important that these setbacks that we have, you know, we navigate through them and get to the other side as much as we can. And one of the key things that I took away from this presentation was Temple Grandin was saying that she had so many obstacles in her life, and every time she would go to someone, it was a rejection. So she said, if the front door is locked, always look for another door. And that may be the key to success. And that's what happened for her. So for me, you know, I feel like taking that opportunity to just keep knocking on doors and finding my way as much as I can will give my children the necessities and things that they need in this life. I wanted to wrap up my portion with a poem by William Stafford, which is called The Way It Is. There is a thread that you follow. It goes amongst things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about your pursuit, and you have to explain the thread. It is hard for others to see it, but while you hold it, you can't get lost. Yes, strategies happen, people get hurt and die, and you suffer and grow old. Nothing we can do will stop time's unfolding. Just don't let go of that thread. So for me, my takeaway here from this poem is that the thread of being, those are my children and what they represent in my life and my purpose for them. I will follow them as far as I can go and never let go, because they would lead and take me to places that I may not otherwise choose to go, but will end up being my revelations for things that I did not know were possible but are attainable. My children are uniquely prepared to be my reason, my purpose, and my eternal love. Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Nedra. And now Nellie will share with us the experience of children on the spectrum who become young adults on the spectrum.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. My name is Nellie Valentine, and I'd like you to meet my amazing family. We feel like we live spectacularly, like typical families. And my kiddos have learned to live through their challenges. So I want to take a few moments. All my children have, they're on the autism spectrum, and they have co-occurring challenges. I have a fourth son, and he, instructs me not to put him in any of my videos. He's 19 years old, and he's just not having it right now. So these are my two older children and my youngest. Next slide, please. So where we started, my two kiddos are 16 months apart. My daughter was very loud, and we knew she was there no matter what. We could hear her from the very end of the supermarket to the top of the second story where we lived. And she and my son, in contrast, total silence, not a peep. And we would say, "Oh, what a good baby," because he was just so quiet, not knowing that, he had this, he was on the spectrum. We had lots of tests, his hearing, etc., and all were coming out, but there he was, just this quiet one. And much like Shanae and Cecilia, all of the other symptoms, the playing, lining up things, they both did some variation of those that were noteworthy. And we discussed with the pediatrician and had the same answers with, boys are slower, your daughter might just be a little hyper. And so next slide, please. This is my son. I want to show you in his symptoms where as a toddler, he's in a room full of people, but he's not going anywhere in particular. He's playing by himself. Look at the eyes. They were just darting and made no eye contact with anyone in particular. He was always alone in a crowd. Next slide, please. So how we live today. And I will talk about the symptoms that you are seeing on this slide. They are the tools for effective services for adults. And I will hopefully tie in to you how these symptoms work for our kids, for our adults. So assessment is really important. Your child could be assessed as an infant. We have developmental screenings at the Center for Autism and various other places. And throughout their lives, my son is 27 years old, and we're having him have a behavioral assessment because of some challenges that are developing. So always look at getting your children assessed. If you feel they're having any of the symptoms that Shanae and Cecilia and Nedra spoke about in their presentations, and Dr. Joyner reviewed in her medical descriptives, please get an assessment for your children. And the earlier you start, the better it'll be. Next slide, please. So my daughter was told that when she had our first IEP, she was in the first grade, and the same thing, couldn't sit still in the classroom, couldn't participate, wasn't interested in doing homework, and just lots of challenges. And so we had her assessment, and the teacher told me that the administrator said, your daughter will never get a high school diploma. Our assessments show that she won't be able to do that. So let's get her on track for a certification. And I wouldn't have it. I said no. So here she is with her high school diploma, which she earned on her own. It wasn't a adjusted diploma. She earned those grades. And then she went on to get a college degree, an associate's degree in science, and then she got a certificate in nutrition, and she's earning her second associate's degree in early childhood development. So parents, trust your instincts, learn so that you could advocate for your children. Next slide, please. My son is the one I will spend some time talking about. He has a diagnosis of autism, an intellectual disability, an insomnia, and he has a lot of sensory challenges. He doesn't like brushing his teeth. He doesn't like how the bristles feel on his mouth, and many typical sensory issues with children on the spectrum. Now he's an adult on the spectrum with the same challenges. He was nonverbal. He just grunted and pointed until he was about 6 or 7 years old. He was diagnosed at the age of 2 with an MRI. And he was kicked out of kindergarten because he was so disruptive. The teacher put him on the sidewalk every day until a PTA parent told me, do you know they're putting your son on the sidewalk every day because he's too noisy and disruptive in the classroom. His cognitive ability is about 9 years old, even though he's 27, but his functional living skills are superb. They're that of an adult. And so all those ABA classes and the other interventions that Cecilia and Shanae discussed as an early child, you know, sometimes we hear, oh, they'll grow out of it. Never believe that. Get interventions for your children. They may seem small and insignificant, but my son is now 27. He's been getting support since he was 2.5 years old, and it's made a tremendous difference in his life. Next slide, please. With early intervention, we started to teach him goal setting. We started to teach him critical thinking skills, how to have empathy for others. You know, he would just not, he wouldn't even sit next to me. I would just sit next to him, and he would go to the next couch, and I would go to the next couch and sit next to him and say, Mommy wants to sit with you. Mommy wants to hold your hand. And so we were teaching him those skills, those social graces. We were helping him to develop those executive functioning skills that were lacking, and improve his communication skills. And slowly he began learning these skills, and he's never stopped learning. We're still teaching him today, and very unconventional ways sometimes, but mostly we used ABA and pivotal response therapy and the current therapies that families are still using today. Next slide, please. So when you give those interventions to your children, they become confident. They have successes, much like Cecilia was describing. What I love about Cecilia's story with her daughter is that she's being recognized by typically developing peers. She's not being recognized as the autistic child or the child on the spectrum in the room. It's important to recognize the child with the spectrum as well. However, the goal is to help them live in society. And 25 years ago, when my son started his journey with intervention, there weren't as many advancements and many technological interventions and just these unique and nifty ways that doctors and behavioral therapists are looking to support families and kiddos on the spectrum. So I am extremely excited to be participating and looking at the generations now, and also reminding families, you know, here's where we started. You can get better. The earlier you intervene with your child, the better you might be able to help eradicate so much of these behaviors. Your children are malleable. Don't forget to give them the heads up and the leg up in life. So now he just goes around the world with, you know, you would see him next to a typically developing peer, and you'd never know the difference as they're navigating until he opens his mouth or until you ask him a question and he has no idea what you're talking about. He has a great ability to manage his emotions. He's able to and it's all just learned and innate because of the years of therapies he's gotten. There's no quick fixes to supporting your children on the spectrum. It's not going to disappear because they get older or because they're a boy and boys do this slower. It's going to disappear when they have continued interventions for the rest of their lives. Next slide, please. So goal setting, we started at 2.5 or so. Here he is at about 20 years old, and he was participating in the Special Olympics. And he said, I'm the fastest man in the West. And every day he would go out on the track and run. I'm the fastest man in the West. And he practiced for 2 months and he won the gold. So it's critical for us to help our kids. He is mimicking and imitating. He's not saying, as a typical 20-year-old, this is how I'm going to do this. But he knows that he had a goal and he wanted to win that medal, and he just went for it. This is the kid who was pulled out of kindergarten and put on the sidewalk. And if I had said, oh, I guess that's all that there is for my son, then he would still be sitting yelling in some corner somewhere. We have to look beyond what others think is best for our children. We have to remember, and it's our responsibility to understand the equity and lack of access that African American, Black, Caribbean, biracial, multiracial families experience and our children experience. And we have to support a bigger conversation in letting our caregivers, our doctors, our pediatricians, nurses, educators know that we have this expectation that does not align with yours. And we want you to try your best to help our children succeed. Next slide, please. So the functional living skills that I shared with you, we declined getting a dishwasher so that we could teach him to wash dishes every day. Not knowing where he'll end up in his life, he would learn how to maintain those skills. Next slide, please. He makes an appointment, now it's every 2 weeks, and he gets his hair all cleaned off, doesn't want any hair on his head. He has a little calculator and he calculates a 10% or 20% tip he'll give the barber. He pays him and say thank you, and out the door he goes. So we're developing these life skills, and at the end of the presentation, you will see where we're doing this so that when he's on his own, these are habits that he can practice, and he could be prepared, and he won't be floundering and just really upset because mom isn't there to help him with getting his hair cut or paying the barber. Next slide, please. So once again, early intervention and skills building. I don't know if you had put the video piece for us to hear the sound. I forgot to mention that to you.
Let me give it a try.
Okay. Yeah, so it's not on. Is it on?
I think I might have to select when I share the audio, because I hear it.
Okay, yeah. So if you could exit and then start again. Thank you so much. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Share sound.
Okay. Spaghetti, chicken, apples, carrots,
Thank
cottage
you.
cheese. Pick one.
No problem.
Okay, you want spaghetti. There you go. Take a bite.
This is my youngest, but
Got it?
my oldest son, he had ABA therapy his entire life. And this is an example of a feeding therapy, but the concept is the same. You're showing
That's
them,
part of the pasta.
so he loves spaghetti, so that's his first choice. And so we help them to and then the next one, please. We help them to learn, yes, this is preferred, and then here's how we live with non-preferred items. We were
Cottage cheese.
Cottage cheese to him. He does not like cottage cheese. So they were teaching him in ABA. So he gets the spaghetti first, and then he gets a little bit of cottage cheese, and then he
Do you want more cottage cheese?
and gets more cottage cheese.
Turn it this way.
Take a big spoon. There you go. Oh, no, too much. Come on, we gotta finish that bite though.
Next slide, please. So I did not invent this. the majority of kids on the spectrum, they learn by doing preferred tasks and helping them with learning how to differentiate and how to make choices that they like, and then introduce choices that they may not particularly agree with, but making a compromise. And that's been my children's entire development. So we've taught them how to make choices. My youngest doesn't like to do homework. He's in the 8th grade. And so it's natural for us. There's no kicking and screaming and yelling. And but I would just say to him, he'd say, Mom, I want to play Roblox or whatever. And I'd say, well, is the homework finished? And then he'd like hem and haw, and then finally say, no, not yet. Great. Get your homework first, and then you could get to Roblox after. And it's many times it's an easy transition. Sometimes he's upset about it, but he knows, because he trusts me, because I've demonstrated to him that I have his best interest at heart, and he will get his reward when he's finished with what he's doing. So there's no big fuss and screaming. He goes and he does his homework. He doesn't like it. Sometimes I have to help him. Sometimes I have to motivate him, give him a motivational talk. I'm not motivating him. He's motivating himself, but we get it done. When you do that consistently with these kids, they end up trusting themselves. They end up trusting a process. They end up trusting you, and they get it done. So that's been my children's experience. And so when you have these habits that you build, it just becomes a part of who they are. My son, this slide, I'm showing his 20th birthday, and he wanted a Nemo or one of those cakes. And so there we are, giving him the cake he wanted. And because he had such a fantastic year leading up to his birthday. And so I want to touch upon social skills as we transition into these slides. And please share the next slide. And so here, so now you could share the next slide, please. He goes through life just doing things he loves. It's a big part, that whole celebration of life and giving him the things he wants. He works really hard. Like, that is something that I think Cecilia or Shanae shared earlier, that the wins for their children, the wins for my kids result in us. They love to travel. They love to do things they enjoy, and they know that if they deliver where they're supposed to, the rewards are right around the corner. This is him at Disneyland, his most happy place in life. And next slide, please. And this is just a cute story. So the woman on the left picture with the angel's hat is the executive director of the company that I work for. And so they hosted us a few years ago at an Angels game, and the family's on the spectrum. And so she was a gracious host. She catered to us, got what we needed, got us set up with just tons of delicious stuff. And so that was his first love. He's like, wow, somebody treats me like this. So he just totally was like hanging on to her. And then he decided he wanted to marry this person. And we said, well, that's not how it works. So then he decided he wants to marry Minnie because he loves Minnie. So when we went to Disneyland, we told Minnie, he wants to marry you. And so she was hugging him and giving him a kiss. You should see him blushing. But it was so great to see that, it's a character, but he got the concept. And then I could tell that he would take that and generalize those thoughts, and it started with him hanging out with the executive director of our company. So it's important to expose them, and it's important to reward them. Next slide, please. And so here he is. He's in the Knights of Columbus at our church, and he was doing a pancake breakfast. Next slide, please. And so learning about his health, we're transitioning to and these are all, if you look at the original slide I showed, and I'll show it a little bit later, all those tools that are important. So learning about his health, we had a health fair, and he went to participate with us and educate people about autism. Next slide, please. He loves to exercise, he enjoys it. He swims and he walks 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day. Our family have a history of diabetes, so I work really hard to make sure he's not at risk. And so here he is. With COVID, everybody slacked off. It was hard to get out and exercise and do a bunch of things. So he gained some weight. His A1C went up to 5.7. And as soon as we were able to, we got back on the routine and got him exercising. And now it's back to 5.4. And 5.4 means you don't have diabetes at all. So really happy about that. Really happy that he loves the outdoors and he loves to exercise. But we're also teaching him those skills. Next slide, please. We're also working on his education and his career, because it's the list of tools that, because my son has intellectual disability and may not be cognitively where he should be, it doesn't mean we could introduce some skills to him. So he was making the commencement address at his graduation from adult transition at the age of 22. And then during that same year, he did a presentation on recycling, and he decided that he really loves recycling and he wants to take care of the earth. So he's now, next slide, please. So he's now in college, and he's learning how to be a part of a business, and he wants to have a career. And he's been in the college for individuals with disabilities since he graduated from adult transition, and we intend to keep, and he's learning a lot. In fact, that's why he's getting reassessed right now, because he's having some behavioral challenges internally, but in terms of looking at his future and where he wants to work and develop, he's showing these improvements that I feel, let's reassess him and see where we could take him further so he can eventually land this job that will be a great job for him for his future. Next slide, please. So I'm sorry, could you go back to the slide before, the prior slide, please? So the tools are important. The path that our adults take, you know, I think sometimes it's easy to have them sit in front of the iPad or sit in front of the TV. And my son does his share of that. But also he is planning his life. He has his calendar, and he has an iPhone that beeps and tells him time to go jogging, time to go exercise. You know, this is what I need to do for school. He has a schedule, the schedule that we teach children like Shanae's son and Cecilia's daughter to utilize. Those schedules are important for families on the spectrum to learn how to use them, so that when they become 25 and 26, they knew from the time they were 5 years old, like Cecilia's daughter, and 5 years old, like Shanae's son, they knew how to use a schedule. They understood the value of a schedule. They understood that the schedule was critical for their development. It makes them feel good when they know where they're going. It's called priming. Kids need to know what they're doing next. So my son has his calendar. He knows that during his day, he needs to drink 8 glasses of water. He does that every day. He knows that he needs to take 10,000 steps on the counter on his phone. So, or on his watch. So he looks at, I'm at 5,000 today when I go for my walk. He has an aide that comes 5 days a week. And after after school, and they go in the neighborhood and they walk until he catches up to his 10,000 steps. He knows that he needs to do the dishes. He knows he needs to take out the trash. And so these are things that we created the schedule at the age of 5. At the age of 27, he's going through this schedule, and he's not whining. He's not screaming. He's not uncomfortable. These are things that he knows have value to his life. And we created the social story and let him know, here's why we're doing this. Those things are really important for our kiddos. Next slide, please. So now we're preparing him for life without his parents when he's an adult and he's on his own. And we started that a while ago. So this is in the book to the left, the transition scrapbook, has the pages of his year in the transition. And I didn't do this book. The transition teacher, who's now retired, but she was phenomenal and everyone loved her, told us the value of having our kids having these scrapbooks of the days in transition. So he has all his friends. He has their phone number in his phone. Many of them, doesn't communicate with all of them, but that's a social tool we built for him in his life. And every now and then he looks at the pictures and says, oh my gosh, I got to call so-and-so. And he gives them a call. 90% of the time they don't respond, but he goes through that process so that when he does develop real friendships, they answer. And I didn't put his picture in this presentation, but he has 3 buddies that have been his buddies since maybe the 7th grade or 6th grade, and they are still his buddies today. One moved to Utah and the other one moved to Palm Springs, but they still have a Zoom meeting once every couple of weeks or so. And then they all come to Orange County, every quarter or so, and hang out and go to eat, go bowling. So, and I remember when my kids were diagnosed, much like Cecilia, I had no idea, or Shanae, I had no idea what autism was. But as I started to go through that process, I realized, my son will need to have a social life. And I didn't want him to socialize with other people with his disability. I wanted him to socialize with typically developing peers. And, I was really encouraged by a doctor. I said, let him socialize with people like him. He could build relationships with others later. And these 3 young men are the best of friends, look out for each other, and it's great to witness their relationship. On the other side is the scrapbook. So I have on the cover, my son learns visually, and that's why we record every single thing, the majority of the things that he experiences, so he could have the visual recap and have a recording of his life. So those are his uncles and his little brother. And so he writes their names because he doesn't remember the names he doesn't remember a lot. So he writes. And so when he has a moment and I'm tired of him playing on the computer or whatever, I'd say, go write in your scrapbook, So we take pictures, he puts them in and he builds it. Next slide, please. And so you could just go through these slides, Avery. So we travel a lot. We take great pictures. We make sure that he's this is my niece in the white coat. That was her white coat ceremony. The one on the, please go back for one quick sec. The woman in the blue dress and the man in the brown shirt, I'll talk about them later in a little bit. So the next slide, please. This was my niece graduating from medical school in Riverside. And next slide, please. And so that's grandma, who was in the earlier picture. She was diagnosed with ALS and she's since passed away. But then he has these memories and he says, my memory of my grandma. And he could remember and he says, it's like Simba, Mom, the circle of life, you're here and then you have to go. So just making those things not be scary and difficult for them. Next slide, please. And so, and then one thing before I conclude and show the last slides, I have a team for my kids. My daughter has her team, my youngest has his team, and my and this son, they have a team of professionals and other people who I consult with. They are a part of their journey. One is my co-conservator for my son. She is a doctor. And so I have some young, really amazing, wonderful, ambitious medical student, and another is she's working on her PhD at in UCLA, and they're on my team so when I'm not here, they're a part of what's happening in his life today. They may not be in his life in the future. No, none of us know what will happen, but we are preparing them to help him as he goes through life. And many people have like family members or older siblings that kiddos could live with. But I wanted to have a separate team of people who are professionals in the field and can understand the needs of individuals on the spectrum, and who could help prepare them so that when they're 70 years old or 80 years old, they can help them. And I want to tell you about this young man named Petey who passed away on Monday. And I dedicate the work that I'm doing for individuals like him, and I dedicate my life to help young families and women, moms in particular, and dads in particular, who want to help their kiddos to understand the importance of getting them the best life they know today and preparing them for the best life they're going to have tomorrow. My son is living his best life, but Petey died at 69 on Monday. He lived on his own. He had caregivers coming in, and he fell down some stairs. I don't know if it's going to the laundry or wherever, but he fell. And he didn't tell anyone that he fell. But then like a day or two later, they realized he was kind of woozy and was asking him. And he, much like my son, he has intellectual disability. So they weren't able to help him get to what was really wrong. And by the time my friend called and said, I pray for Petey, he's really not, we're not sure what's going on. He died the next day. But obviously he might have hit his head and something was wrong, and he died of a heart attack. He had a heart attack on their way to the ambulance and then to the hospital, and then he had like 4 or 5 more heart attacks, and then they eventually said they're not going to resuscitate him anymore. But Petey was 69 and he wanted to live until he was 80. So, his family is going through a lot of guilt, and I had to tell him, Petey he had a great life. And the one thing, we all handle this journey differently, and some people don't want people to know they have a disabled sibling, and but and that's why I advocate with a loud voice, and I put my children front and center, because I want families to know, African American families, Black, Caribbean families, our kids have value. Our kids are amazing. They're extraordinary. And it's so important if you give them the opportunity to live their best life, they will live their best life. And they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what you think they're missing. They know what they're embracing. So I want to show you this video of my son. Next slide, please. We went to Vegas, and I have a billion pictures, but I only could pick a few to show you today. So please hit the video. And so he was, we were looking at a Michael Jackson impersonator. So a thing about the video, the Michael Jackson impersonator said, I'm not gonna have him steal my show because now everybody's focusing on him and screaming and so and he just had a blast. He wasn't thinking that he wanted attention. He was just really enjoying this music that he loves. So please allow your adults to live their best life and allow them to participate in the world. Hold nothing back from them. They want to have a great life, and they enjoy the life that they're living. They don't enjoy the life you want them to live. They enjoy the life that they are living. So please remember that, and I encourage you to have them reach for the stars, and they will soar. We have workshops that are available to families, and you could take a print screen of our upcoming workshops. I think these have the wrong dates. I updated my slides and I did not send it to Avery, but if please take a picture of this, please scan the code and you'll see our current workshops. Dr. Joyner has a workshop coming up in May of 24. And Dr. Ocean, who's our ABA PhD in ABA, she has a workshop coming up in I don't know. No, she doesn't have one as yet. She let me know. And then I have a workshop coming up called Supporting Early Childhood, and I believe it's on May 21st. But the dates are there. We also have virtual developmental screenings. And that is where if you have a young child between birth and 5 years old, and you see any indication that there are challenges, get them developmentally screened. And we have one in November, but if you want virtual screenings for your children, there are many agencies that allow you to do so. So just look for that and contact us at the center. Next slide, please. We have our Empowering Women of Color parent meeting once a month. It's the third Monday of every month. So we have the next one coming up on May 15. Next slide, please. And you can join our community of African American, Black, and Caribbean families. If you take a print screen, you could or connect with the QR code, you can get information about us. Next slide, please. And we have a website. We are working on updating it, but it has lots of resources for African American, Black, Caribbean resources, providers. So please take a look at it and get information about providers that look like you and could support your families and your kiddos. And the next slide, please. And you can email. So if you'd like to follow up or get information about us, that is our email address, ucicandabc@hs.uci.edu, and ask us the questions you're looking for answers, and we'll happily give them to you or resources that you might need. And the next slide, please. And these are our social media addresses that you can also follow us and see if there's information we might be able to give to you. And we just moved. We're literally moving this weekend to a new location in Costa Mesa, so that phone number might not be working. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, so thank you so very much. I hope that what Nedra, Shanae, and Cecilia provided for you, and of course, Dr. Joyner, was helpful to you, and that you were able to learn some things about our children through adulthood in the spectrum. And we ask you to always use us as resources and look to, we have a plethora of information we could share with you, and we're thrilled to be able to accommodate you in any way we can. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. It was certainly our pleasure being here with you this evening.
Thank you so much, all of our parent advocates, Dr. Joyner, Ms. Melly, everyone at COR who's helped out and put on this event, First Lady, Ms. Cheryl. Thank you all so much for being here, for joining and just sharing this amazing information, and yeah, creating this community resource. So now I'd like to open up the floor for our Q&A. We did receive a couple of questions during the presentation, so I'll go ahead and read those, and then anyone who's on the call, feel free to unmute or drop them in the chat. So to start, our first question is my niece's child is autistic, but she hasn't told us. I wanted to invite her to this, but couldn't because I'm not supposed to know. My nephew was the one who told me. He said my niece had her tested, but I already knew by her behaviors. My question is, how do I approach my niece to tell her that I know and that it's okay?
I personally would say that I noticed certain traits. So before I would even like go directly to the parent, I'd do a little research just to make sure, like, you know, the symptoms are kind of matching up. I apologize if you hear my son in the background. But I'd do a little research just to make sure, and then I would bring it up gently, because you never know how others may take it, how they may think that you may perceive it. But gently bring it up and be like, you know, I noticed these things, and I think it would really be beneficial if maybe we both did a little bit of research together to see how we can help create a safer or better environment for them. And that could possibly lead to you guys stumbling on, you know, more resources that can help you guys with the issues.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to weigh in on the question?
I was just going to say, I think from a clinical standpoint, or from as a clinician, when I have families come into my office and they express their concerns and I say to them, I'm concerned too. I think I hear a lot of parents feel actually very validated of like, finally somebody saw what I was seeing. And so I think what I would say to you, that my advice would be like to really think about your hesitancy to say something if it's your discomfort, and not to put you on the spot, or discomfort, like your assumed discomfort for them, because it might be that just simply saying like, hey, I'm, you know, such and such told me, or I'm aware, it could feel good that like, okay, somebody else knows. And that even if there is a moment of, I think, you know, it might be hard in that moment, but I hope in that this being your family, that there's an opportunity for repair later, or that they might come back. But I think, I guess the advice would be like, just say it. I think we don't realize how much people actually want us to ask or to validate what they've been feeling.
Yeah, I love that. And I was just going to say, as someone who was so much like in denial, and I already felt isolated, and it was probably self-imposed. I think that the same way that like you give feedback at work, you always kind of want to like start with a compliment and then sort of dig in. It's kind of like if you let your niece know that like she's doing such a great job, you've been watching how she's been parenting, and like, oh my gosh, you're doing so great, you know, and then bring up the challenges or something that you're seeing, it might make her feel a little bit more relieved and not judged. Because I think sometimes when it's like, oh hey, I'm seeing this, you might feel like, ugh, you know, like, why are you telling me this? You're not around my kid all the time. But if it kind of comes with like a compliment, you know, I feel like that always sort of softens the blow, and also kind of might make her feel like you're on her team in this and not critical. Because I feel like when you're already dealing with this and you're just trying to fight to get, you know, providers to see what you're seeing, you already feel like everybody's already being critical of you, that just the smallest thing of like, I see you and I know how hard this is, and I know that, you know, this is probably difficult. You're doing such a great job, can go such a long way, because I feel like, you know, parents are always just kind of like treading water constantly and saying, oh yeah, we're okay, but like we're kind of drowning over here. So yeah, just being an ally, I guess.
And I think I agree with everyone else. And what I'd add to that, all to the conversation also, is maybe go online and print out an article or two and then highlight just what you want her to see, because, you know, we're not going to read a 10-page article, but the article would look for information that speaks to early intervention, that speaks to, if we do this now, here is what tomorrow could look like for your child. So that with all the encouraging and the hand holding and the affirmations, just offer information about, here's why it's important, and here's why I think you're important enough and your child is important enough that I'm giving you this information, because I would love to see them succeed beyond our wildest dream if they start to get the help they need today. And studies have shown and research have shown that getting the help today takes them a long way.
Thank you all so much for your amazing comments and suggestions. We have another question in the chat. So we want to know, what's the difference between autism spectrum disorder and Asperger's?
I'll defer to Dr. Joyner.
I was gonna say, do you want me to take it? So Asperger's it's in terms of like a diagnosis, it's not one that we give now anymore, but Asperger's was seen as being separate from autistic disorder, which is what the diagnosis used to be called. And it was thought of as like a high functioning autism. So, in order to have a diagnosis of Asperger's, you had to have no sign of delay in language. So, those individuals typically were like highly verbal, and they typically had average to above average cognitive abilities. But then the problem with separating these diagnoses out, and not to go on a complete tangent, is that clinically we weren't, and I mean we as in the people who are diagnosing, physicians, psychologists, were not reliable among each other. And so they changed the way we diagnose, which now it is called autism spectrum disorder. So somebody who 20 years ago would have been diagnosed with Asperger's, now we would call it autism spectrum disorder. So you can have an individual who's incredibly, quote unquote, high functioning, right? And that their impact of their diagnosis is minimal, and an individual who has a more severe impact on their development. And they both would have the same diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. It's just that now clinically we define the level of support that that individual needs. But we're now kind of capturing everybody under the same umbrella.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joyner, for the expert definitions. I myself didn't know that actually until today. I didn't realize that's what it was. So it's really interesting to see how things change over time. Does anyone present on the call want to unmute and present a question or type one in the chat? While we're all digesting, I actually had a question that I wanted to ask. I personally know what this is, but I don't know if everyone does. So I was wondering if you could talk about ACC devices, what they are, what they do, and maybe some pros and cons as to why you would want to use that versus maybe a different method.
I don't know if Nellie or I feel like you mentioned it in your presentation, or Anitra also mentioned it. If you want to take a stab at it before I jump in and give my technical response.
Well, I think, you know, it's so with my son, like we call it drawing language out. So there's a school of thought of, you know, trying to draw language out of them, and then there's other school of thought that and so the some devices would not be as beneficial because it's allowing them to remain dependent on devices. And so then there's this other school of thought that's looking to have you use words that will eventually turn into language and sentences, etc. So with my son, he was nonverbal for like 6 years, and we went with the PECs and the non-device route. And then in fact, I'm having him assessed at the age of 27 for speech, to give more speech therapy, because now his language has taken on a new, he's blossoming in a new way. So I'm not sure that I'm correct here, but my understanding is, you know, just the difference of approach is, you know, wanting to make sure that they're actually learning how to sound words and to use their words and use language. And they, over the years, I've heard so many like lazy tongue and just a bunch of things, but ultimately the PECs was what we use, and we had a really sophisticated process. We had flashcards. It's like, here's a word. This is a cow. Cow is an animal. You know, whatever, and he learned. So that's my 2 cents there. I don't know if Nedra has anything she wants to add, or Dr. Joyner.
I think just the only thing I'll add is just also, so you know, the AAC is augmentative and alternative communication is what it stands for. And while Nellie is mentioning devices, so people think of like iPad, it's really just any like or she's also mentioning something called PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System. It's offering children or individuals another opportunity outside of just your expressive speech to communicate. And so I'm glad Nellie even highlights that there's different camps around it. A common misconception is that if you introduce that to your child, that then they're not going to speak, and that you talk to a speech pathologist who's highly trained, that's not going to be the case. If anything, it's creating an opportunity for your child to communicate. And so just recognizing that our communication is more than just what we can expressively state, you know, with words. And sometimes for individuals on the spectrum, being able to use pictures, signs, other sorts of means, an iPad, you know, technology is so advanced now. It's wonderful. So definitely something you, like Nellie is mentioning her son getting assessed. It's something that a trained professional such as a speech pathologist could then assess a child to see what form of communication is the best for that child.
And that it progresses, you know. Yeah. When they were 5, it might have been this, and then when they're 12, it's something totally different. So once again, the parents who are advocates, who understand that I won't settle for what you're telling me every single day, because in my home, I'm seeing this other thing with my child. It's important parent education is just so tremendous and critical, because as your child progresses, if anyone had told me at the age of 27, my son would be in college and would be looking to be an expert on the environmental, you know, he looks at these marches of trash, and he's just disgusted by it, and he wants to do something about it. And I would have, or that he'd be speaking, and he's still not speaking fluently, but I would have never have imagined that future for him. So as they continue to progress, look at the assessments and then look at ways that you could push further with whatever developmental supports they're getting.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for just about one more question. So we have a grandparent in the group who has a granddaughter that's 3.5, not speaking in sentences. She knows her colors, shapes, and recognizes items and can say them. But her parents don't think that she has more than a speech delay. So what, as a grandparent, can they do to advocate for her?
I think this could be a great maybe starting point of saying, hey, I just attended this wonderful presentation and I heard some really great information, and maybe it applies and maybe it doesn't, but I would encourage them to bring this up, or whether to their pediatrician or to seek out an evaluation, kind of with the message of like, you know what, you might be right. This could just be a speech delay, but also because speech can be a big red flag for other things, it's worth the ask, right? And often I will share with parents who do come to me, like, doing the assessment doesn't mean they're going to end up with a diagnosis, but we rather err on the side of caution, right? While the window of opportunity for intervention is much wider. And not to say you can't, obviously, Nidra and Nellie have pointed out that children grow across their lifetime, but early intervention, the sooner you can do something, the better. So I would just say, like, yeah, great. You wouldn't believe this presentation I was in last night. They mentioned that, have you brought this up to your pediatrician? And my hope would be at this point, if they have a good pediatrician, and I know there are not great ones out there, that pediatrician has sent them for a little bit more than maybe just a speech eval, or at very least a speech eval at this point. So that's just my opinion as a clinician, but I don't know if as a parent, anybody has a different opinion.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if the parents do think that it is just a speech delay and are at least seeking out speech therapy, our speech assessment also gave us the MChat. And it was like a quick 20 questions, yes, no. And that came back as like an at risk for autism. And they were like, so now you might want to, and they were the second people to tell me about the regional center. And I was like, what's the regional center? I mean, I even just called and was like, my pediatrician told me to call, I don't even know what I'm doing. And then they just started asking me questions. So hopefully if they're at least getting in for speech, that could at least be the next stepping stone to maybe move the needle a little bit. Because as soon as you're in somewhere, they're going to start, asking questions. I mean, I feel like at the pediatrician, they're always like the developmental check-ins and screenings that you do. And my youngest is going to be 2 in a couple months. And we still did a developmental screening for her just because, the chances were higher that a sibling also has it. And so I'm happy to say that she's actually surpassed my oldest in terms of language, which is sort of like equal parts devastating, but then also so proud. And now it's one of those things that looking back, I'm like, oh, that's what they meant when they were like, does she give good eye contact? Because I'm like, oh yeah, she's looking at me, but it's like my youngest is like having a very serious conversation with all of us. And so yeah, I feel like as scary as it is, all of the various like assessments in so many places like Pretend City, if you've never been there in Irvine, they have like all of the different questionnaires just on the wall, and you could just go and take your granddaughter to play and then just like pick up a couple packets. But I feel like so many places now are so much more open with, giving out resources or sort of kind of helping guide you in the right direction. So that was just my 2 cents.
Thank you all so much again for just presenting this information and sharing your experiences. I learn something every time, and I've been working with CAN for quite a while, and I'm still like learning so much. I think it's super valuable. Thank you all again for your time. Thank you for all the attendees here on the call for listening in and joining us today, for asking questions. I'm going to drop the link to our survey just one more time because we'd love to get your feedback to see if you like the presentation, if there's anything you'd like to see, future events with the COR Health and Wellness Ministry. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you all again, and take care. Bye.
Good night, everyone. God bless.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you. Hopefully, some of you at the health fair. I know you'll be there, Nellie. So looking forward to seeing you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.